Well, good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page. Hope everybody's doing well today. Got some folks joining on already. Good morning, Linda and Gail and others who are on our live stream. We are working our way through the book of Daniel, and we are ready for Daniel chapter 3 today. Daniel chapter 3. Let me go ahead and pull up our PowerPoint screen here. That's what we'll be looking at today as we study this chapter. Hello, Connie and Lyle, Brian. Good to see you guys on here today. As always, as I'm going through this, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the comment section here, and I will address those comments or answer the questions as I see them. So the first 4 chapters of Daniel are pretty straightforward. Good morning, Diana. First 4 chapters are pretty straightforward, historical accounts of events that take place. As I told you in the beginning, the book of Daniel, as we have it in our English Bibles, is not... Good morning, Sharon. The book of Daniel, as we have it in our English Bibles, is not in chronological order. We are going to, however, study it in chronological order. So we're not going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on through 12. We're going to, as it might appear, we're going to jump around, but we're going to follow the chronology of the book. I really enjoy studying books that way. I think it's beneficial to study the Bible that way too. Obviously, the way we have our Bibles, they're written more, they're arranged more topically than chronologically. If it were chronology, the book of Job would probably be the first book of our Bible. But that would be an odd place to start for a person who's never seen a Bible before. Anyway, we are going to study the book of Daniel chronologically. Good morning, Glenda and Joni. Glad to have all of you on here today, and hope you're ready. Daniel chapter 3. So we're still in the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. The Babylonians are still in power, and we looked at some things already. We talked about in our introduction, all the people and places of Daniel, or not people and places, the people and dates of Daniel, defined the names and kind of set the time frames for the book of Daniel from about 606 BC until about 522 BC. The book of Daniel covers nearly around 70 to 80 years. We need to understand that. We looked at Daniel chapter 1, where that time in the events are set. We learn about the training that Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah received in Chaldean or Babylonian captivity. We learned about Daniel's purpose and the way he was going to behave himself in that captivity. We looked yesterday at chapter 2, where Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that he could not remember, and God blessed Daniel with the ability to interpret dreams, and we learned about a kingdom that was going to be established in the days of a fourth world empire. And of course, we understand that as the Roman Empire, God would establish his kingdom in the days of those kings. Daniel chapter 2, verses, as you see there on the screen, verses 36 through 45 explains that. Well, today we're ready again for Daniel chapter 3. So we're going to break the text up as we've been doing. The first 7 verses, we are told of an image that Nebuchadnezzar built. Now, this is not some of the events here that we're going to read about Nebuchadnezzar. This is not an uncommon practice among pagan leadership. They often viewed themselves as either gods or descendants of the gods. I mean, we see that with the Egyptians. We see that here, obviously, with the Babylonians. And, in fact, we see it even in the history of Rome. Some of your later Roman emperors considered themselves to be either gods or some form of deity or a descendant of gods. So Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold. This image was 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, 60 cubits by 6 cubits. An approximation of a cubit is about 18 to 20 inches. So we'll just call this 90 feet by 9. He set it up in the plain of Dura. Now again, Babylon, if you're looking at a biblical map, you have the promised land, Israel, Palestine, however you want to say it, basically situated between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. Babylon, Chaldea, this group of people who have taken the Israelites captive, is far to the east. It's located over at the tip of the Persian Gulf, It's near the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and this location here, this plain of Dura, is somewhat west of the Euphrates River. So that just gives you a little, in modern day Iraq, that gives you a little, I guess, frame of reference for where we are talking about here. So he builds this image of himself, and he wants this image worshipped, and it's to be worshipped. Let's see here. It's dedicated by all the officials of the provinces, verse 3, and he wants this thing worshipped when people hear the sound of music. Beginning in verse 4, he describes that, and he says, "You shall fall down and worship the gold image that Nebuchadnezzar has set up, and whoever," all right, so this is a universal requirement for people in the kingdom of Babylon. He says, "Whoever does not fall down and worship shall be immediately cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." Now, if we're familiar with this book of the Bible, we know what we're getting ready to study here, but it's good to set up how all of this came to be with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. "So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre, in symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down." Now, it's important to notice there, all the people, nations, and languages. Again, Babylon, the Chaldeans, are in the process of being the dominant world empire. Now, they're going to fall not many years after this, but they are basically on the march. And so everybody, again, all these people, nations, and languages are subject to this requirement to fall down and worship the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. That's your first 7 verses of Daniel chapter 3. But there are 3 men that we have recorded here who not just failed to do this. They absolutely, they wouldn't do it. I can't pull the word for some reason. They resisted, okay? So at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. Now they accused them, but here's the thing. The accusation is true. "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound," I'm not going to read all these again, "the sound of the instruments, shall fall down and worship the golden image, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." Now notice what happens here in verse 12. "There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon." We see a little prejudice here, and we see a little jealousy, perhaps a little patriotism. These are Babylonians, these are Chaldeans complaining that, hey, you've got these foreigners, and you've set them in prominent positions. And, of course, that happened after Daniel, if you look back in chapter 2, the end of chapter 2, they were placed in those prominent positions after Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream. You've put them in this position, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. "These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up." Now, this is not new information. You remember, if we go back into chapter 1, when Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were set up to go through a 3-year period of training and testing and things like this, that they maintained their faithfulness to the Jewish dietary laws that are recorded in Leviticus chapter 13. They were not going to partake in anything. So it was not unknown among Babylonian leadership that these guys, these Jewish men, were doing things a certain way. The king's response is a rage. Let me do this. Verses 13 through 15. Nebuchadnezzar in rage. The Hebrew terminology here means a violent anger. This guy, a word we might use today, is absolutely furious. In rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true that this is what's happened? If you are ready, at the time you hear the sound of all the music, and worship the image, good." All right, this is a threat that Nebuchadnezzar is making here in verse 15. "It'll be good if you do that, but if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" And that shows Nebuchadnezzar's polytheism, belief in many different gods. So here's their answer. I love this. O Nebuchadnezzar, this is Daniel 3, beginning in verse 16, their response, down through verse 18. O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. Think about what they just said. The charges have been brought, the accusations have been made, they're standing before the king. He tells them, listen, you can get out of this situation if you'll just do this. And their response is, we don't have to say a word. And, when I read that, hey, good morning, Mr. Danny. When I read that, when they said, we don't have to say a thing to you, my mind goes to when Jesus was on trial and all the accusations are flying against Jesus. And he remained quiet. I see the same fortitude here, the same strength. We have no need to answer you in this matter. You know where we stand, is what they're saying. Good morning, Miss Janie. If that is the case, if this is what you're going to do, if you're going to throw us immediately into this burning fiery furnace, because we will not bow down, they say, our God who we serve is able to deliver us from the from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. They have no fear here. Our God is able. But then they go even a step further. But if not, that is, if God does not deliver us, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Good morning, Miss Diana. Now, when you go back to verse 13, Nebuchadnezzar flies into this violent anger and fury. And he's probably pretty fired up here still. And they say, we don't have to answer. If you do this to us, God will deliver us. But even if he doesn't deliver us, we're not going to bow down. That shows the character that these men have and how strong they were and how dedicated they were. And again, they're not in Jerusalem. They're not in their hometown. They're not near the temple. They are hundreds of miles removed. They've been through years of training to become, I guess I would say, government positions of governmental authority here, and yet they will not compromise their faith. And I think there's a great lesson that the Christian can take from that. It doesn't matter what circumstance you find yourself in as a child of God. It doesn't matter who you're around, what the situation is, the threats that may exist. You can be faithful to God. You don't have to give in. You don't have to compromise. And the world will try. But, if we're living faithfully and consistently, we can have that same response that they had. I don't have to answer you. You know where I stand in this. I love that answer. All right, so then beginning in verse 19, here then are the consequences. Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Again, you remember, he's the one who set up a system where when captives were caught, that the best and brightest of the captives could be trained and used in service of Babylon. And so now his expression changes toward them. He's looking at them differently now because of the way that they have answered them. It says he tells them to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. I wonder if that's an idiom. I seriously doubt that they had a thermometer on the outside of the on the outside of the furnace that told them the temperature, and then they multiplied that by 7. I think this is just an expression of they got it really hot, really fast, and it has to do with the rage and the fury that Nebuchadnezzar is feeling here because of the answer. And we understand what happens here. He commanded certain mighty men of valor, the best of his guard, perhaps, to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. These men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, in the midst. They didn't take any time to change clothes or get them ready. They just took them immediately and bound them, cast them into the fire at the king's command. And you look at verse 22, the king's command was urgent, the furnace exceedingly hot, The flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Serious situation here. Those 3 men fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Verse 23. Now beginning in verse 24, we have the deliverance. Verses 24 through 30. King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he arose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire?" Well, yeah. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Yeah, that's right, King. Verse 24. "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." Now, I want to touch on something here real quick. I know how this phrase has often been used, and people say Jesus was in the fire with them. And it's a misconception of what's actually being said here. The King James says, like the Son of God. The New King James actually capitalizes the word Son. If you were to look at it in the Hebrew language, you would understand that it says he looks like one of the sons of the gods. Both of these terms are plural. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar is not looking for the second person of the Godhead, as we as Christians might assume, seeing this phrase, Son of God. This 4th person looks like one of the sons of the gods. We frankly don't know who this was. It could have been the captain of the Lord's army that we read about in the Old Testament, which a lot of people do believe was the pre-incarnate Christ. It could have been an angel, just like in the lion's den in Daniel chapter 6, an angel closed the lion's mouth. We just don't know. But it was not Nebuchadnezzar confessing that Jesus was in the fire with him. All right? I want you to understand that. So Nebuchadnezzar goes near to the mouth of the furnace, tells him to come out. And you notice the way Nebuchadnezzar says this, servants of the Most High God. Well, again, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, they believed in many, but from what he's witnessing, he understands there's something different now about the God of these Jewish men. They came from the midst of the fire. And all the governors, they all witnessed this. Their bodies, the fire had no power. Verse 27. The hair of their head was not singed. I don't know how many of you have ever been singed by fire. I have. Burn the hair right off your face and off your head. Their garments were not affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. You think about that. Let's say you do a fire pit or build a fire in a backyard somewhere. You're going to smell like that, aren't you? Just being around it. They were in it, and they didn't even smell like fire. Blessed be the God, beginning here in verse 28. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And that's just it. They trusted in God. You go back and you read verses 17 and 18. If it's the case that you're going to do this to us, God will deliver us. And if he doesn't, we still won't bow down. They trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap. Okay. Nebuchadnezzar has some kind of, he's got some kind of hang up with cutting people in pieces and burning their houses down. You go back to Daniel chapter 2, and you remember when he called the magicians, the astrologers, and the sorcerers, he said, if you can't tell me my dream, I'm going to cut you in pieces and burn your house down. This guy may have had some anger management issues. I'm just guessing. But if you say anything amiss, we're going to cut you in pieces and burn your house down, because there is no God who can deliver like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. It's amazing to see the providence of God. Now this here, so I talked about the providence of God in Daniel chapter 1, where it says that God brought Daniel into the favor of the prince of the eunuchs. All right, Daniel, it's kind of like Joseph back in Genesis chapter 39. Providence is God working in such a way that it is not necessarily evident at the moment. Okay, so for example, We know the end of the story of Joseph. Remember Genesis chapter 50 and verse 21. Joseph was talking to his brothers and he said, you meant it to me for good. You meant it to me for evil, but God meant it to me for good. Now that's after everything had happened. That's after he had been thrown into the pit by his brothers. That's after he had been sold into slavery. That's after his brothers had lied to Jacob that he was dead. And we see the providence of God working throughout the life of Joseph. We see it in the life of Daniel. Now this here is obviously miraculous. This is not just simple providence in Daniel chapter 3. They were thrown into a fiery furnace that was so hot, the people who threw them in died. But they didn't even smell like fire when they were delivered. And so this is not just providence. This is the miraculous. When I got home the other day from doing Daniel chapter 1, my wife and I were talking about that, and she asked me, maybe explain the difference between the providence and the miraculous. Remember, a miracle is always immediate, observable, and undeniable. Providence is not always immediate. It's not always observable. I don't know about the deniability, but providence works over time, kind of behind the scenes, and a miracle is completely different from that. So that's Daniel chapter 3. We see the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and their unwillingness to compromise. These guys didn't understand. They wouldn't give in to what we sometimes give into, and that is this concept of situation ethics. That is, the situation determines what's right. The circumstance determines what's the right thing to do. No. God's will determines what's right to do, and it doesn't matter what time it is. It doesn't matter where you are. Right's right and wrong is wrong, period. Okay, so like I said, that is Daniel chapter 3. Tomorrow, of course, is Friday. I do not plan on going live tomorrow. So we will pick up Monday, Lord willing, in Daniel chapter 4. Yeah, Daniel chapter 4. Let me look at the comments here real quick. Deborah says, that's a serious threat. I'll bet it worked. And he got his way a lot. Yeah, about Nebuchadnezzar cutting people in pieces. Hey, Mom. Good to see you. Love you too. Okay, well, that's Daniel chapter 3. Like I said, we won't be back till we won't be back for Daniel chapter 4 until Monday. And now, of course, Sunday we'll be going live, our services at 10 o'clock. And Sunday I'll be preaching on the Church of the New Testament. And my sermon Sunday is going to be based on this thought. If it doesn't matter where you go to church, then no church matters. All right? If it doesn't matter where you go, then no church matters. So we're going to talk about that Sunday. All right, guys. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for your comments and greetings. Hope you have a good weekend, and hope to see you on the next video.